Tonight, we are going to be doing 2 chapters, and we will be finishing all but one more chapter, which happens to be by far the longest in the book. And that is, starting next week, is Numbers. 21 different chapters about different numerical phenomena in the Torah. Different methods using numbers. But tonight we're doing organizing concepts according to the Sefirot and organizing concepts according to the 4-letter name of Hashem. For those who have been part of the fundamentals classes, which is many of you, if not most of you, we spent a lot of time on the Sefirot and Hashem's name. And so some of this might be review. Certainly some of it will be new. But for those who are not watching the fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut, so the basic concept here is using the Sefirot and the 4-letter name of God as an organizing tool. In other words, looking at the world through the eyes of the Sefirot and Hashem's name. The verse, Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, I place God before me at all times. This is one of the important verses about Hashem. I place God before me at all times, which simply means that I at least attempt to have what we'll call God consciousness, or to be conscious of God at every minute. Rav Ginsburg teaches it one step further, is that there's a way that everything that I see is a reflection of the 4-letter name of God. In other words, I see the Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey in all phenomena, time, space, and soul. And the same thing with the Sefirot, because we know that the letters and the Sefirot are the channels, are the instruments of creation. This is how God creates and maintains the world, is through the Hebrew letters and the Sefirot. So these are ideas that we have talked about before, but here we're taking these ideas and applying them to a model, to a method of learning. And so just to review, the Sefirot manifest themselves on 3 different levels. The first is 10 manifestations of God's energy and light. The Sefirot reflect the energy and light of God and are the instruments of creation. The 10 faculties of the soul. For those who are watching the fundamentals, so the last 5 or 6 weeks, our mini-series is on the soul. And we've learned that the powers of the soul are the Sefirot. And the third manifestation is 10 forces of nature revealed through creation. That the 10 Sefirot are manifest in the physical world. So these 3 manifestations correspond to the Baal Shem Tov's teaching that all of reality is worlds, souls, and divinity. So the Sefirot also manifest themselves in the physical material world, in the makeup of the soul, the construct of the soul, the powers of the soul, and as it were, the way that God uses the Sefirot as channels for godly light and energy. So the Zohar, and especially the Tikkunei Zohar, began this revealing this method of using the Sefirot in God's name in order to take a concept and see it as a manifestation of the Sefirot or God's name. This is already in the Zohar, but we have to give credit where credit is due, is that in our generation, Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg has taken this idea of using the Sefirot in God's name as an organizing tool. He's taken it to a whole new level. This is one of the great chidushim of Rav Ginsburg's Torah, is using the Sefirot and God's name to like wearing, instead of rose-colored glasses, like we're looking at the whole world through Sefirot glasses, or the name of God glasses. Okay, so some of the ways that Rav Ginsburg does this, and as I mentioned before, there's quite literally hundreds and hundreds of charts that he has created showing this method. Many of them appear in his different books, and many of them appear right here in these chapters. For those who have 70 faces, the chapters 47 and 48 have many, many, many examples that I took from Rav Ginsburg's teachings. So many times, one that I didn't do is Rav Ginsburg will take a root word, either the 3-letter root word or what's called the 2-letter sha'ar, the gate. This is a grammatical thing. Words in Hebrew have roots. But what he will do, he'll take a root word and he'll show which words are coming from this root as they apply to keter, chachma, bina, dat, chesed, gevura, etc. Because each root in Hebrew has many, many different meanings and subtle shades of meaning. So Rav Ginsburg will create what he calls a parsouf. A parsouf is like a persona, a whole holistic, full development of a root word. So that's one example. Another example, just anything that has a number, let's say 3. There's so many things, and we've pointed out even in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, of concepts that are given over in triplets. And certainly in Kabbalah and Hasidut, but just in normative learning, such as Pirkei Avot. So Rav Ginsburg, if it comes as a triplet, so he's going to connect it to Chachma, Bina, and Dat. Any concept that comes in 7s, so immediately Rav Ginsburg is going to connect it to the 7 lower Sefirot. Again, as an organizing tool. So let's say the 7 fruits of Israel. So Rav Ginsburg will explain how each of the fruits is connected to one of the Sefirot and why. What's the connection between, let's say, wheat and chesed, and barley and gevura, etc. Or, of course, the 7 ushpizim that we invite on Sukkot: Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, and David. Of course, we know from any siddur how the 7 weeks of the Omer are organized according to each week is one of the lower Sefirot. So the first week is Chesed, the second week is Gevura, etc. Then one of my favorite, and I'm really, really hoping that someday it will come out as a book. Many of you may have seen some of these videos, but for approximately, I think it was 2 or 3 years, Rav Ginsburg gave a monthly Sunday class in English, and I was the MC. during those 2 or 3 years. And in fact, I meet a lot of people that I don't know who somehow recognize me from all these different videos, many of which you can find on YouTube, connected to Rav Ginsburg. But what he did in many of these classes, and I found it not just fascinating, but so meaningful, is he took different people in the Tanakh and showed, now let's say we talk about Abraham, Avraham. So we always relate to Avram as Chesed. That was his main personality trait. But does that mean Avram didn't have Gevura or Tiferet or Netzach? So Rav Ginsburg would go through all of the Sefirot and the different stories and midrashim and Talmudic wisdom about these personalities. And here you saw the whole picture of the person. It's absolutely fascinating. I think about it all the time. And in different teachings, I try to give this over. Because if you look at Avram as just chesed, that's very, very one-dimensional. But if all of a sudden you see the gevura of Avram, the tiferet of Avram, the netzach, etc., then you see the whole picture. And the last thing, Rav Ginsburg has put out many, many different commentaries on the Chumash, on the 5 books of Moses. And one of them, it's not very known, but it's actually a 5-book set. We know that on Shabbat, we divide the portion into 7, what are called aliyot, 7 sections. And at the public reading on Shabbat, so that 7 people are called up to read from the Torah. So Rav Ginsburg went through the entire Chumash, and he showed how the first reading, the first section of every parsha, it relates to Chesed. And the second parsha, section of the parsha, relates to Gevura. The third to Tiferet. It's absolutely fascinating because it's not something that we would usually think about. Yet here we divide the parsha every week into 7 aliyot. Well, 7, if it's connected to 7, is going to be connected to the Sefirot. And when you go through it, I'd say sometimes it seems like you have to fish to find the connection. But in most cases, it's when he explains it, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that the first reading in this particular parsha is about connected to Chesed, and the second one is connected to Gevura. So these are all examples, especially because, like I said, Rav Ginsburg has taken this method to an entirely new level. But it's not that he made up this method. It's in the Zohar. And for those who have the book, 70 Faces, so you'll see it. These 2 chapters are fairly extensive. So everyone can look into that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, for the rest of the class, I'm going to be sharing different charts and speaking about them briefly. I just want to say the purpose isn't to go through each chart and go into the depths of it, because that could be a half a class, each chart. That's not the purpose here. The purpose is just to explain this method. And again, as every week, I can only pick a few examples to do. But for those who have 70 Faces, you'll see there are many, many, many charts here. And hopefully in the WhatsApp, for those who do not have the book, we will be sharing, I believe last Thursday, we already began to share some of the charts, and we will continue to do that. Okay. No, 1 second. No. No. Okay, give me a second here, okay?
Hi, everybody. What a basic.
Oh, I was going to this. Okay, got it. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's it. Okay, thank you. Ephraim to the rescue, as always. What would we do without Ephraim? Okay, our first, no, excuse me. Okay, the first chart that we want to look at, again, is from Rav Ginsburg. This is called the Torah Academy. This is a very, very important idea where Rav Ginsburg has taken all of what we'll call secular knowledge, science, knowledge, and the arts, and arranged them according to the Sefirot. And this chart or this model is meant to be an organizing principle for a Torah Academy, for a university, a college, where all of these different subjects would be dealt with, combining the very best of secular knowledge and Torah wisdom at the same time. So again, the idea is not to go through every single one of these, but we can see the full range of different, here in the crown, so we have faith in Torah, but here we have art, and then we have mathematics, the natural sciences, psychology. Psychology is an easy one because, again, for those people who are following us on Tuesday night on the fundamentals series, so this is exactly what we've been talking about last week, and this week also is about da'at and its connection to consciousness and its natural connection to psychology. The social sciences as being a reflection of chesed is a very obvious one. Law being connected to gevura and might is also a very easy one to understand. And when these are explained, political science is kingdom. So all of these, in a sense, make perfect sense. But what I want to point out is that this chart was created with the bigger picture of creating a college, university, or academy that would unify Torah wisdom and secular knowledge. And this is like the different schools within the college, just like every college has different schools. So each one of these secular knowledges that connect to the Sefirot, so that would be like a separate part of the university. So this is a very, very fascinating one. Rav Ginsburg has a whole booklet explaining the connections between the Sefirot and each one of these arts and sciences. So now we're going to go just to the next page. And no, excuse me, I wanted to. Here. I mentioned that this idea of using the Sefirot as a organizing method of learning and remembering is first brought down in the Zohar. And so what we're looking, this chart right here, is from the Zohar, and it goes through 10 different, we'll call it divisions or segments of the Jewish people. And this one is an amazing one because it's so connected to the Sefirot that it's very, very obvious. So here, Roshei, the heads of Israel's thousands in Keter. So remember, we talk about that there are 3 heads of Keter. And of course, Keter hovers over the head. So the Zohar says that this is a segment of leaders who are heads of Israel's thousands. These are the leaders of Israel. So this is already in Keter. Then we have the Chachamim, the wise ones, which of course comes from the word Chachma, wisdom. And then we have the Nevonim, this comes from Bina, the understanding ones. Then we have the Hasidim, of course we know of Hasidim today, comes from the word Chesed. So that obviously is connected to Chesed. And then we have what are called Giborim, mighty people, heroes, connected to Gevura. So we see that even the names of these different segments that we refer to within the Jewish people connect directly to the Sefirot. And as mentioned, this comes all the ways back to the Zohar. This is one that's not obvious. It's Marei Torah. The masters of Torah are connected to Tiferet. And that's because of Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet, which relate to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. So Yaakov is always connected to Torah learning, because it says, Yaakov ish tam, Yoshev Ohalim. Yaakov was a sincere person who dwelt in the tents. And all the commentaries going all the ways back 2,000 years ago said, which tents? The tents of Torah, and specifically the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, the son and grandson of Noah, had yeshivot in the land of Israel. Now here we have the prophets and seers in Netzach and Hod. And this is because in the Zohar itself, it connects the power of prophecy and divine inspiration to these 2 Sefirot of Netzach and Hod. And then we had Tzadikim, because we have a verse, Tzadik Yesod Olam. The righteous one is the foundation of the world. Yesod is foundation. So Tzadikim relate to Yesod. And of course, kings, Malachim, relate to Malchut. Malchut means kingship. So this one is like a super important one, because here we see super clearly the connection between different manifestations or expressions of the Jewish people directly connected to the Sefirot. And I just want to say, when I say that it's an organizing method, it's because this is tremendously helpful to remember different teachings. Because if you have a teaching and you have nothing to connect it to, sometimes it's hard to remember it. But when you have some anchor to connect it to, so one could think, well, who in Israel is connected to Chachma? Oh, the Chachamim. Who in Israel is connected to Chesed? Ah, the Hasidim. In other words, it's extremely helpful as a memory tool. Okay, so now the next one is, this is an amazing one. I'm going to take a few minutes to do this one. And here what we're looking at is the 9 vowels according to the Sefirot. This is very, very ancient tradition as to which vowel is connected to which of the Sefirot. And again, it now is not the time for us to go through each one and explain why, for example, the Patach is connected to Chachma, or why the Kametz is connected to Keter. But here, I just want to show how the 9 vowels are connected to the first 9 Sefirot. And if you look down at Malchut, it says no sign, because Malchut receives. So in a sense, Malchut is a combination, as it were, of all of the Sefirot flowing into Malchut. So there's an amazing, amazing teaching here. And for those who have the book, so the teaching is on the next page, 448. But the Chaim Vital, the main student of the Arizal, so he explains that he knew of a certain healing technique of the Arizal, but he didn't merit to learn how to do it himself. In other words, he knew that the Ari used this technique, but he himself didn't know how to apply it. So what's the technique? So this is quite amazing that the Arizal would put his finger on a person's pulse, and he could tell this person what, we're talking about physically, but obviously our physical condition in many, many instances is connected to our spiritual, psychological, emotional state. And so he could, through the pulse, he could understand what was ailing a person, or what a person could change in order to be more healthy, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. But how did he do it? So the Ari explained that the pulse can be measured in what he called dots and lines. In other words, like a quick pulse would be what he would call a dot, and a longer pulse, an extended pulse, or a beat of the pulse would be a line. Now, if you look at this chart of the vowels, you'll see that all of them are either lines or dots or a combination of the two. Either they're lines, dots, or a combination. So the Arizal, by feeling the pulse, he could understand through the lines and the dots, as it were, of the pulse, which of the Sefirot, which of the vowels was like coming through the person, and the vowel is connected to one of the Sefirot. So he would know by the pulse which vowel and which Sefira, and if he knew the Sefira, then he could know what was ailing the person, or what the person could do better, or what rectification the person could do in that Sefira. So this is just an amazing, amazing idea. We know that in Eastern, especially Chinese healing, there is a lot that is connected to the pulse. This is not exclusively a Jewish idea, that through the pulse, one can tell what the state of health of a person is. But here, of course, there's a deep Jewish Kabbalistic angle to it that the Arizal merited to learn or understand. It was revealed to him. But as his students said, that he himself did not learn how to actually do it. But there's one more amazing connection to this, and that is the sounds of the shofar. So even if you look in a machzor, a special holiday book for Rosh Hashanah, and it actually shows graphically that there are three sounds of the shofar. The tekiah is one long sound, so it's like a line. The teruah are 9 staccato sounds. Those are like dots. And the shvarim is 3. So those are lines. And sometimes it's shvarim trua, where you put the together. So here, what's being alluded to is that the sounds of the shofar, it's like this secret language. It's a code. Now, lines and dots, this is connected to really one of the first breakthroughs in communication, and that was the Morse code. The Morse code was signals that were being sent through dots and lines, and then they were being translated into language and messages. So we didn't merit to hear from the Arizal exactly how to translate the sounds of the shofar according to the vowels and the Sefirot. But nonetheless, just knowing that the sounds of the shofar connects us to a divine, it's hard even to explain, energy, a divine message, divine code. And even if we don't understand it in an intellectual way, if we let the sounds of the shofar enter into us and we become one, so in a sense, the message is given over in a unconscious, superconscious way. Maybe when Mashiach comes, he'll be able to, like, very specifically explain to us the sounds of the shofar and the various messages that we can learn from this. May we merit this kind of wisdom. Okay, I'll just end with 2 more because then we have to get to the next chapter. And that is, we just finished Sefirot to Omer. And this is clearly one of the most organized methods of understanding the soul and the personality. As we went to the Sefirot, and we did Chesed Sheba Chesed, Gevura Sheba Chesed, Tiferet Sheba Chesed, and onwards for 49 days, it's all very organized. And this gives us a method, because let's say we're just told that between Pesach and Shavuos, we should go from slavery to freedom. Well, what tools do we don't have any tools. So here, Sefirot to Omer gives us the tools through the organization of the Sefirot to know what to be working on every day. Okay, so now we are going to go to the 4-letter name of Hashem. Okay, so here we're now in chapter 48. This is on page 460. This is again, we could quite literally spend a whole class on just this chart. But in short, what it's showing is that the 4-letter name of God, and now we're adding, if you look at the top row, is called the Kotso Shel Yud, the upper tip of the Yud. And this was very much taught and revealed by the Arizal, that the 4 letters of God's name have, in a sense, a hidden 5th level. So many times when Rav Ginsburg is using the 4 letters of God's name or the 5 letters, it depends on the circumstances. So in his book, Sod Hashem Le'Re'av, which is the whole book, 500 pages, is about these 4 letters, and sometimes the 5th level. And in the book, there's quite literally hundreds of charts taking the 4 letters of God's name or the 4 letters in the tip of the Yud, and explaining a full gamut of different ideas and concepts. So here, what we're looking at is one of the most important models in Kabbalah, where there's a correspondence between the letters of God's name and what are called the Kabbalistic worlds. And those Kabbalistic worlds correspond directly to the Sefirot, and each of the Sefirot and each one of the worlds is hinting to a level of consciousness. So here, as I'm talking, I'm just inviting everyone to be looking at this, because we do not have time to go through this and explain it. But here, because anytime you talk about Kabbalah, you're going to talk about the different worlds, and you're going to talk about the different Sefirot, and you're going to talk about the different letters of God's name and different levels of consciousness. But this model puts it all together for us. And so it's very organized, and it's very easy to remember. So this is a very obviously a very important chart, which again helps us take the letters of God's name and see how they're manifest in all of the created worlds, because the lowest world, Asiyah, is this physical material world. And as you go up the worlds, it becomes more and more, we'll call it ethereal, or more godly, or more spiritual. And it's the same thing with the Sefirot. We're going from below to above. We're going from the behavioristic parts of a human psyche, and then we're going to the emotional, then to the intellectual, and then to the more spiritual and mystical. So this is a very important chart here. On the next page, 461, we have virtually the same thing again, but here it just gives over the faculty of the soul and the 5 different levels of soul. So here we have the letters of God's name, and we have the worlds as we had before. But what we're adding here is, how do the letters of God's name relate to the 5 levels of soul? And how do the 5 levels of soul relate to the 5 different worlds? So again, as I'm speaking, hopefully everyone is looking at the chart. And I'll just emphasize again the importance of using this idea as an organizational tool. Because sometimes you'll listen to a class. Let's say I wasn't showing these charts here, and I'm giving over the 4 letters of God's name and the higher tip of the Yud, and then I teach about the 5 levels of the soul, and then which faculty of soul is emphasized in which level, and then which world it's connected to. And for many, many people, especially if you're not taking notes, is like, whoa, like it's so much information. How am I going to remember this? How can I organize this in the mind? So that's why these kind of charts are so important, because once you can actually look at it visibly, then it's like the teachings can come back to us. If not, it would be like just like a run-on of information with no tools to organize it in our minds. Our minds need organizational tools. And in fact, I haven't mentioned this, but in the Gemara, this happens scores and scores and scores of time. When the Gemara is about to give over a series of teachings that are either super connected or subtly connected or barely connected, but for whatever reason, the Gemara is going to give over a series of different ideas. And so before they start, they have like a code of the first letters of each of those subjects. And so why is it there? Is because it's not easy to remember that there's now going to be a series of 9 different teachings, and maybe some of them are not all that obviously connected to what happened before it. So how is a person supposed to remember? So the Gemara, they're called simanim, signs. And actually, if you remember, in the Haggadah of Pesach, we have 10 plagues. So it's not always easy to remember all 10 of them, and even the order that they come in. So in the Seder itself, in the Haggadah, there is the mnemonic of the first letter of each of the plagues to help us remember. That's this idea of, when I keep on saying, an organizational model. Okay, now we're going to do another one. And this one actually is from the Haggadah. I mean, it's a chart based on the Haggadah. Obviously, this would take a lot of explanation, but let's just go through it from top to bottom according to the left column. So first we see the 4 letters of God's name and the tip of the Yud. And we see which level of soul it relates to. And here, the faculty of the soul and the world. So this we've learned before. But during the Seder, all of a sudden, we have 4 cups of wine. And then for many people, we have the 5th optional one. So here, all of a sudden, is a whole new connection, that each cup of wine relates to a different letter of God's name, relates to a different part of the soul, relates to a different world, and the next one is expression of redemption. We learn, why do we drink 4 cups of wine? Because in the Torah itself, in Parshat Ve'era, so there are what are called 4 expressions of redemption. God is promising, this is God speaking to Moshe right at the beginning of the 10 plagues, and says, I will take you out, I will save you, I will redeem you, I will take you to me, and I will bring you into the land. That's why we have these cups of wine. So here, this is very, very important, because each of the cups of wine represents a different stage of the redemption. And as we go through the Haggadah, so we drink the cups of wine at different places, but they're always connected to these expressions of redemption. And then the last one is the meaning. What does it mean, I will take you out? So it's the 10 plagues. What does it mean, I will save you? When we actually left the borders of Egypt. What does it mean, I will redeem you? These were the miracles at the Reed Sea. I will take you to me. This is receiving the Torah at Sinai. And what does it mean, I will bring you to the land? Obviously, entering into the land of Israel. So here we see this is such an important tool to understand the Seder, to understand the 4 or 5 cups of wine. So again, much to talk about, but this is a classic example of how we can make all of these connections. Okay. So we finished with the different charts, and now we just have a few more that we want to do. And that is, for those who have the book, we're on page 463. And that is, again, I'm bringing this because I think it's very, very important to see how this method, even though I've mentioned many times that Rav Ginsburg has taken this method to absolutely new levels, but already in the Zohar, this method is being used. So here on the bottom of 463, there's a verse in the Torah about Bezalel. Bezalel is the main craftsman who made the tabernacle, the Mishkan. So it says like this in Exodus 31, verses 2 through 3. Exodus 31, 2 through 3. It says, see, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda, and I have imbued him with the Spirit of God. Now here's the part I want to get to. With wisdom, with insight. Now in the Torah, the word for insight is with understanding, and with knowledge, and with all manner of craftsmanship. So if we really look carefully, Bezalel is being given 4 qualities or 4 talents, that he has a spirit of wisdom, insight or understanding, knowledge, that's 3, and with all manner of craftsmanship. So in the Tikkunei Zohar, it says, what does it mean with wisdom? It connects it to the Yud of God's name. With understanding, with the Hey of God's name. With knowledge, the Vav of God's name. And all manner of craftsmanship with the Hey of God's name. The important thing here is the Zohar, when it read this Parsouf, it saw God's name being reflected in the spirit that God was giving over to Bezalel. Now, the next one is on page 467, and this is a fascinating one. We've mentioned this in different classes many times, and that is the idea that Albert Einstein, in a sense, revealed the search for what he called the unified field theory, that he was instrumental in showing that the entire physical world is based on 4 forces. And so he wanted, of course, an E equals MC squared. So he unified matter and energy. And he explained that and all of science explains that there are really 4 major forces of the universe. And actually science already knows how to unify 3 of the 4, but they haven't figured out how to unify gravity with the other 3. And so Rav Ginsburg explains, and this is so important, now they call it the theory of everything. They don't use the term unified field theory anymore. The term used now is the theory of everything. And the theory of everything is because they know intuitively that everything in the universe is unified. They know that physically, materially. We know it through the Shema, of course, that not only physically and materially, but spiritually, everything is unified. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's all one. So Rav Ginsburg explains that the strong nuclear force, this is the Yud. The weak nuclear force is the Hey of God's name. The electromagnetism force is the Vav. And gravity is the lower Hey. So this is just a fascinating idea of showing, in a sense, the unification of Torah knowledge and, secular knowledge and Torah wisdom. Okay, next is 466. Again, I wish we had more time, but this is also a very important, a classic one about the holidays of Tishrei. And in different teachings from Rav Ginsburg, and also in different teachings in my different books, I do explain this in much greater detail. And that is how there are four major holidays here: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Simchas Torah. And so here, they correspond to the four letters of God's name, and especially because as each holiday flows into the next one. The only way to really understand what's happening in Tishrei is to see the flow from Rosh Hashanah into Yom Kippur into Sukkot, Sukkot into Simchas Torah. It's one flow. And so Rosh Hashanah is the Yud, because it begins the 10 days of Tshuva. Yud, of course, equals 10. Rosh Hashanah begins the 10 days of Tshuva. Yom Kippur is the Hey, because on Yom Kippur, and this is a whole Torah, perhaps I'll be able to share it on the WhatsApp, is you have 5 prayers. Again, Hey equals 5. You have the 5 prayers of Yom Kippur, the 5 prohibited acts on Yom Kippur: not eating, drinking, marital relations, leather shoes, etc. 5, the Kohen Gadol went to the mikvah 5 times on Yom Kippur and connected to the 5 levels of soul. The Vav of God's name, which equals 6, is connected to Sukkot, because the sukkah itself is a cube. We're living within this divine space called Sukkot, and we shake the lulav to the 6 directions. So this is the Vav of God's name. And then the final Hey is Hoshana Rabbah and Simchas Torah. And this is signified that at the end of Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of Sukkot, we take 5 willows and we hit them on the ground 5 times as to indicate the final sealing of the holidays. And then on Simchas Torah, we finish the 5 books of the Chumash, and then we start again. So this is just a beautiful, beautiful understanding of first of all, the flow of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, as it's manifest in the holidays of Tishrei. Okay, so that's really all we have time for tonight. Everyone who has the book, really, really worth it to look at all of these charts and see the wisdom in this organizational tool. And for those who don't, hopefully in the next 2, usually on Monday and Thursday, we post, and hopefully we'll post some of these explanations or charts.